The European World, 400 to 1450, Chapter 5, Battle and Barter, from the Norman Conquest to the Rise of Trade. Because of his religious habits, King Edward, who ruled England in the mid-11th century, was called the Confessor. He was a descendant of Alfred, the King of Wessex, who had repelled the Viking invasion 2 centuries earlier. Since Alfred's day, the Vikings had settled down, but other foreign powers still longed to rule England. Edward's death gave them their chance. King Edward's wife was Edith, the sister of an Anglo-Saxon nobleman named Harold Godwinson. Edith, however, bore no children, and therefore Edward had no heir. As he aged, 3 powerful men dreamed of inheriting his kingdom. One was Harold Godwinson, who claimed that his sister's marriage entitled him to the throne. Although Harold was not of royal blood, the Anglo-Saxon people of England supported his claim. In Norway, King Harald Hardrada also claimed the right to the English throne because he was related to a Danish king who had once ruled England. The third contender was Duke William of Normandy, the region in France that had been settled by Vikings. King Edward was half Norman and had grown up in Normandy, and William argued that Edward had promised him the throne. Each of the 3, determined to take control of England as soon as Edward the Confessor died, disputed the other's claims. In 1066, as the king lay on his deathbed, a comet appeared in the sky. Modern astronomers know that it was Halley's Comet, but the people of medieval England saw it as a sign of terrible events to come. They were right. When Edward died, the Anglo-Saxons chose Harold Godwinson as their new king. Harald Hardrada of Norway immediately invaded northern England and advanced on the city of York. Harold Godwinson managed to defeat his Norwegian foe, but 2 weeks later, William's Norman fleet landed in southern England. William was well prepared with supplies, war horses, and even a prefabricated castle. His army included many of the younger sons of the Norman and French nobility, ambitious to win fiefs of their own. The 2 armies met at Hastings, a town on the southern coast of England. Harold's troops were situated on a rise and made a wall to protect themselves. The Normans, at a disadvantage, had to attack going uphill. At some point, however, the wall broke down, and Harold was shot in the eye with an arrow. The Normans were victorious. One victory was not a conquest, as Duke William knew. He headed west with his army, building castles along the way. Turning north, he fought his way across the countryside to London, his final target. Once he controlled the city, he built his biggest castle, the Tower of London, which still stands today. All along the route of his conquest, William killed or drove off the Anglo-Saxon noblemen, giving their land to his followers. He also married the widows and daughters of the Anglo-Saxons to his followers. In this way, the Normans brought the feudal system to England. The English peasants, formerly free, became serfs living on manors run by Norman overlords, and Duke William became known to history as William the Conqueror. William of Malmesbury, a monk born to an English mother and a Norman father about 20 years after the Norman conquest, wrote in his history, "This, Battle of Hastings, was a fatal day to England, a melancholy havoc of our dear country through its change of masters." The Norman conquest of England was, in a way, the last of the Scandinavian invasions. For several hundred years, pressure from northern warriors and their descendants had shaped the history of England and France. In Germany, things had gone somewhat differently. The German lands had suffered fewer and milder Viking attacks. German rulers, however, had to deal with other problems. The Conquered and Their Conqueror. English monks, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, around 874 to 1187. To see the Norman conquest through English eyes, historians turn to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a record of early medieval English history. It had been started by monks at various monasteries in the days of King Alfred and continued through the death of William the Conqueror in 1187. The Chronicle describes the common folk's opinion of William. While complaining that William was greedy and that he denied people the right to hunt, the historians do say that William was a very wise and great man, and more honored and more powerful than any of his predecessors. He had castles built, and poor men hard oppressed. The king was so very stark, and deprived his underlings of many a mark of gold and more hundreds of pounds of silver, that he took by weight and with great injustice from his people with little need for such a deed. Into avarice did he fall, and loved greediness above all. He made great protection for the game, and imposed laws for the same, that whoso slew hart or hind should be made blind. He preserved the harts and boars, and loved the stags as much as if he were father. Moreover, for the hares did he decree that they should go free. Powerful men complained of it, and poor men lamented it. But so fierce was he that he cared not for the rancor of them all, but they had to follow out the king's will entirely if they wished to live or hold their land, property or estate, or his favor great. Alas, woe that any man so proud should go, and exalt himself and reckon himself above all men. May Almighty God show mercy to his soul, and grant unto him forgiveness for his sins. Gregory wins popular vote. In the mid-10th century, King Otto I the Great managed to bring some unity to Germany, even though to the Middle Kingdom, carved out in the Treaty of Verdun a century earlier. Otto defeated the Hungarians and Slavs in Eastern Europe and began to convert these peoples to Christianity. He also marched into Italy to rescue the Pope from local nobility, much as Charlemagne had done. In 962, he followed in Charlemagne's footsteps by taking the title Roman Emperor. Emperor or not, Otto and his successors found it no easy task to rule the Germans. The vassals of feudal Germany were very powerful. They kept the right to elect and dethrone their kings. To take some power away from the vassals, the emperors began appointing bishops and abbots to govern their territory. Not only were these educated men good administrators, but they were also loyal to the emperor who appointed them. Learning flourished in Germany, encouraged by Otto and later emperors. One outstanding German scholar of the 10th century was the nun Roswitha of Gandersheim. The daughter of a noble family in the Duchy of Saxony, she was put at an early age into a Benedictine nunnery where she received a good education. Early in her studies, she wrote religious poetry about the miracles of the Virgin Mary. She then read the comedies of ancient Roman playwrights and was charmed by their language. Realizing that plays could be used to teach religion, Roswitha began writing dramas, the first plays written since Roman times. They dealt with religious subjects, such as the martyrdom of a young Christian woman in the Roman Empire. Finally, Roswitha wrote histories, including The Deeds of Otto, which records the reign of Otto I the Great. The other great scholar of the age had a very different life and career. Gerbert of Aurillac in France came from a peasant family, but local monks recognized his genius and educated him. He went to Spain, where he lived among Arab and Hebrew scholars in Barcelona. Although he studied with Christian scholars there because he did not know Arabic, he learned about Arab mathematics and astronomy. He knew so much that after he died, a rumor started that he was actually an evil magician. In reality, he was a man ahead of his time. For example, he tried to convince Europeans to give up Roman numerals in favor of the far simpler Arabic digits. Gerbert's fame brought him the support of the Roman emperor, who made him pope. The peasant boy ended his career as Pope Sylvester II. During the lifetimes of Roswitha and Gerbert, religious feeling gained strength across Europe. In 910, the Duke of Aquitaine, a large province in France, founded a monastery at Cluny, France. Its abbot, however, was answerable only to the Pope, not to the Duke. As the monastery gained respect, other monasteries that had strayed from the Benedictine rule reformed their practices. Once lay people, or ordinary citizens, stopped being afraid that their churches would be destroyed in warfare, they began contributing to the building of parish churches, cathedrals, and new monastic houses. The architecture of these new structures is called Romanesque because it came from Roman models. Its arches were rounded on top in the Roman fashion. William the Conqueror brought this style to England from Normandy. Wealthy individuals often admitted that their donations were made to ensure their salvation. "This, however, I do, first for the love of our Lord and God, second for the salvation of my father and mother, third for the safety of my sons," wrote one French donor. Regardless of the motives for their contributions, people felt that they could expect certain things of clergy and church. They demanded that the clergy be educated, unmarried, and well-behaved. They also wanted the papacy, the office of the Pope, reformed. Emperors since Charlemagne's time had claimed the right to reform the papacy whenever it became mixed up in their fights. The German emperor, acting in the spirit of religious renewal, appointed better educated men as popes. But the clergy wanted to elect their own pope, and for that purpose a monk called Hildebrand developed a system called the College of Cardinals. Based on the old custom of having priests elect their new bishop, the College of Cardinals, which still exists, gathered a group of high church officials called cardinals to vote for a new pope whenever a pope died. Hildebrand's plan removed the emperor from the process of choosing a pope. Ironically, when Hildebrand himself became Pope Gregory VII in 1073, the College of Cardinals did not elect him. He was so popular in Rome that the clergy and people alike proclaimed him pope. Pope Gregory's contemporaries described him as a small man with a weak voice, but he had a strong vision of what the papacy should be. The Pope, in Gregory's view, was the voice of St. Peter, the founder of the first church in Rome, on earth, and he had to answer to St. Peter and to God for the sins of humans. It was the Pope's duty to chastise any sinner, even an emperor. This belief brought Gregory into direct conflict with the emperor of the day, Emperor Henry IV of Germany. In Gregory's eyes, Henry IV was a sinner because he continued to appoint bishops and abbots in Germany and to invest bishops with the symbols of their spiritual office, the bishop's staff and ring. Only the Pope or his representative was supposed to conduct that sacred ceremony called investiture. New rules of the Church said that no one who was not a clergyman, not even the emperor, could form investiture. By 1075, Gregory felt powerful enough to strike against Emperor Henry. He wrote several letters to Henry, calling him beloved son, praising the emperor for not selling church offices and for upholding the principle of an unmarried clergy, but attacking him for appointing abbots and investing bishops. The letters grew bitterer as Gregory emphasized his spiritual power over Henry. Henry responded with a letter of his own addressed to his bishops. In it he called Gregory not pope but false monk. Gregory, said the emperor, had taken the papal throne improperly. He was neither appointed by the king nor elected by the College of Cardinals. Henry argued that he too had a sacred trust from God, a monarch's duty to cleanse the church of a false pope. Gregory sought allies among the German nobles and spoke of excommunicating Henry. Excommunication, a punishment that the church can use against its members, bans people from participating in the Christian religious community. In medieval times, it also dissolved feudal bonds of loyalty and forbade anyone from serving the excommunicated person. If the Pope excommunicated Henry, the German nobles owed him no loyalty and could select anyone they wanted as their ruler. Gregory excommunicated Henry in 1076. The nobles immediately met and declared that they would give Henry 1 year to make peace with the Pope. If he did not, they would depose him. Unable to find loyal supporters among his nobility, the beleaguered emperor traveled to Camosa in the Alps, where Gregory was staying. For 3 days, barefoot and clad in the rough wool garments of a repentant sinner, the emperor stood in the snow and cold outside the walls of the castle that housed the Pope. Moved by Henry's tears and pleas, and fearful of seeming too severe, Gregory finally relented. As Pope, he could not refuse to absolve the sins of someone who was sincerely sorry, so he lifted the excommunication order. Henry, however, had not given up the fight. He regained the loyalty of his nobles, and in 1084 he marched with his army into Rome and selected a new pope. Gregory died the following year, but Henry's triumph was not complete. Papal reform had become too strong a movement for the emperor to control. Popes after Gregory continued to pressure Henry on the subject of investiture. A rebellion by German nobles deposed Henry in favor of his son, who ruled as Henry V. Finally, in 1122, The church persuaded Henry V to agree that only the clergy could invest bishops with the symbols of office, and that the emperor could not appoint bishops and abbots. The bestowing of fiefs, though, remained the right of a king or an emperor. Go east, people. During the 12th century, the papacy and monarchs brought more peace and stability to Europe, and the population grew. Trade flourished. Peasants and nobles alike sold their extra grain and spent their money. Some purchased practical items such as plowshares. Others brought luxury goods, silks, ribbons, and spices to add zest to bland food. With the revival of trade and crafts, towns became an important part of the European landscape, as they had been in Roman times. They prospered throughout Europe, but nowhere more than in Italy. The Italian cities of Venice, Genoa, Pisa, Milan, and Florence became centers of trade and industry. Milan, which controlled overland trade with Germany, produced fine armor. Venice, Pisa, and Genoa were rivals in seagoing trade, both in the Mediterranean Sea and along the Atlantic coast of France, England, and the Netherlands. Lords were so interested in attracting people to their towns that they offered to free peasants from serfdom if they would migrate to the towns. Other serfs took advantage of town laws that promised freedom to those who managed to live for a year and a day in town without their former masters claiming them. Town air breathed free is how they put it at the time. And as townspeople prospered, they also sought freedom from kings and bishops, so they could govern themselves and make their own rules of trade and citizenship. Some rebellions against bishops were brutal. When the townspeople of one French city sought freedom, their bishops hid in an empty wine cask in a basement, but they found him and killed him. As a final indignity, one man cut off the bishop's ring finger and stole his ring of office. A new governing class arose in the towns in the 12th century. It consisted of the merchants who dealt in luxury items and large shipments of grain, wine, and dried fish. Unlike the nobility, whose wealth came from the land, the merchant class earned their wealth from trade, and they needed goods to trade. The growing demand for goods encouraged artisans to produce high-quality cloth, art, and other products. Peasants enjoyed the prosperity that came from bigger harvests and sought better quality shoes, plows, tools, and pottery. Skilled artisans flourished along with towns and markets. In the late 12th century, due to the growth of Europe's population, people began moving into previously unsettled areas. When village populations outgrew their manors, lords urged serfs to clear forests and drain marshes, offering freedom to serfs who gave up their claim to land on the established manors and settled the new districts. During this period, Netherlanders began to settle the marshes bordering the North Sea, building dikes and windmills to drain these areas. Around the same time, the German emperors conquered land in the Slavic East in an expansion called the Drive to the East. They encouraged people in the heavily populated Netherlands to migrate to territories along the Baltic Sea and in Hungary and Bohemia, the modern-day Czech Republic, bringing their technologies for draining marshes and plowing. Just as in the 19th century United States, the call to the adventurous was, "Go west, young man." In the 11th and 12th centuries, agents of the German lords recruited serfs to go east. While William and his Norman lords were establishing their kingdom in England, the westernmost part of Europe, a different kind of migration took place on the eastern border, as peasant men, women, and children trudged into a new life in new lands.